Well, we want to welcome you back to Curiosity Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
So we had a conversation last episode around resiliency, and we wanted to pick up a little bit and to continue along that theme of what happens when you have that critical moment, whatever that is, whether it be, natural disaster we talked about, a personal experience that happened to cause a great deal of stress or pressure in your life, and where you go from there. We talked about it in terms of resiliency last week, but we really want to kind of shift today and talk about it from a stress perspective and what happens when you're maybe not as resilient and the stress levels peak and you're living in that moment of stress after that event has happened and where things can go a little bit haywire.
Stress is something that I've been thinking about for a number of years, and not because I'm an enlightened person, not because I chose to think about it. It happened with a situation with my own mother. She died of a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at a very early age. And when she was going through that, she had a series of discoveries. She's not a psychologist, psychiatrist, or anything like that. But in her own experience, which is some would argue is the best teacher, she came to a conclusion that stress causes all disease processes. In other words, you may sit with a propensity toward ulcers or addiction or cancer, and stress triggers it. And so she would always tell me, keep your stress levels low. But she'd say it from a way of not prevent stress, but more of a when something happens, control the stress or deal with the stress. And we didn't have the right words to talk about this. There's probably a psychiatrist, hopefully, write in and tell us what's the right way to talk about stress in that way. But, she would say, make sure that you don't stay stressed. And staying stressed, I think, is the issue. Dwelling on things, and that can be anything from resenting someone or something for something happening to just saying, woe is me, or saying I'm always unlucky or whatever. Here's the fact of life, and that is stressful things are going to happen.
Without question.
And so it's not the stressful thing that happens, and you may have heard this before, it's how you respond to that thing that happens. And if you get into a situation of stress, and you can feel stress, right?
Oh, for sure.
Matter of fact, when I was going through some stuff, someone would say, okay, where are you feeling that? It's like, what kind of woo-woo stuff is this? What do you mean, where am I feeling it? It's a feeling, right? And so it's like, okay, is it in your chest? Is it in your stomach? Is it in your head? And that's a clue to how you carry stress and what you should think about as a sign to reduce it.
Yeah. So this is a really important conversation, and I think it has a lot of application for all of us as we think about how do we carry stress, how do we process it, and is it impacting our lives in a negative way, and to really take a moment to be curious about that. Because it's really easy to make that just judgment statement, just stop being so stressed, just let it go, let it roll off your back, all of the cliches about how to handle stress. Well, some of us need to process, and the processing is not the problem, but it's if you are if you're processing it inward and it's staying stuck. I think to your mother's point, that's where things begin to go rotten.
No question. And that's the same thing as trying to stuff feelings. Trying to stuff stress, it's always going to come out later in uglier ways.
Yeah.
And processing stress is where you went to, though, which I love. Events are going to happen. We're going to feel some kind of stress. What do you do then?
Right.
Because I think we would agree that stuffing the stress or saying or having someone just say, well, get over it, is not the right answer.
Yeah, not helpful.
Can we discover about ourselves a uniquely personal way to resolve stress, to respond and recover in a way that's healthy?
Yeah. I think the answer is yes, we can find that, but it's going to look really different depending on the kind of stress. So what comes to mind as you're speaking is there's going to be an event that happens where you have to take action. It's life or death. Someone is in danger. You are in danger. You have to step in and you have to act. There's not
Right now.
Yeah, right now you have to take action. And I'm really good in those situations. I act and I get stuff done. But it's afterwards when the crisis is over that stress comes washing over me,
Yes.
and I know from historical patterns I've not processed well. And so, that's a very different situation than, oh, there's a project that's due at work and it's building up over a course of weeks and I'm constantly on edge about
Right.
email load
Right.
and phone call load. Very different situation. So I think we have to start with the question of what kind of stress is it, and do we need to take action because there's somebody or our own our safety or security on the line.
I have a dear friend who tells a story in this regard about acting, and this story is the opposite side of the coin. I'm also very good in most situations about acting quickly and not freaking out, not being the one who screams and shrivels. I mean, I can just act. I had a couple of, when I was an emergency response team leader at Intel, where I had to be the one who acted.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty good there. And then afterwards, like you said, the adrenaline hits and you start shaking, and then how you deal with it's a big deal. But sometimes there's stress for not acting. Sometimes there's stress for, I wish I would have.
Right.
And beating ourselves up over it too. My friend tells the story of there was a construction project that narrowed this big street down to 2 lanes with concrete barriers, and it wasn't very obvious what to do. And this poor old lady found herself going the wrong way, and a whole line of cars coming at them. They're at a restaurant situation at a sidewalk, and him and his friend are kind of looking at this going, oh my God, she's going the wrong way, and almost like, oh, isn't that terrible for her, and almost laughing about it. A professional woman at the next table stands up, kicks off her heels, bolts across the cement, holds back the traffic, guides the old lady into a 30-point turn, gets her going the right way, and then tells people to go. And my friend says, how I wish I was the person who sprung into action instead of sitting there looking at the situation and almost laughing about it. It's like, no, go help. Go be useful in the situation, right? And I think that those are two reactions to the same situation. And I sometimes find myself, if it's not an emergency fire, broken something situation, but do I just sit around and wait for somebody else to do something? And then what kind of stress does that do? But we kind of went down a path there. But really, when something happens and your reaction or your response is X, what do you do to recover from that? And what do you do about recovering from that situation?
Absolutely. So I think we've talked in previous episodes about our, we've had traumas that have happened to us and how we've processed, and we've had different tools that we've utilized, different, degrees of counsel and helps from external sources that have helped us get through some things. But I think it doesn't really matter the tool that you find to process and to get the help. The key is just doing it and getting it, because as you said, the stuffing down of the stress or the stuffing down of the incident where you don't process it properly, it's inevitably going to come back up, and it's probably going to come up in some ugly ways.
So what is and we talk a lot about having a support team around you, an advisory board, a support staff, et cetera, whatever you call your group of close people that you can be honest and vulnerable with. And how then can we, at least talk something through? And then what's the sign that you need to do more than that? Right. And so I think if we were to think about just for a few minutes, and this is one of those things where, some people hate the peeling of the onion thing, but instead of just staying on the surface with this, realizing that these things happen to us, sitting down for 20 minutes and saying, what do I do when I have a stressful situation? Who do I talk to? What kinds of things? Because sometimes you may want to talk about certain things with one person and certain other things with a different person.
Absolutely.
But what is your support group? And then how do you know when that's not enough?
Right.
And then what do you do? Because I think we run around from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing so often in our lives, or so much, that we don't stop to say, okay, am I okay? Do you do a daily inventory at the end of the day?
No, I will be honest that by the time about 8 o'clock rolls around, I'm so fatigued. All I can think about is sleeping.
And so I know I should do a daily inventory. I know that would be good for me.
Right.
And I can count on one hand the times I've done that in the last month. But why don't we? Why don't we? Because I think there's a general sense that it would be a good thing. But if you go back through your day and just say, okay, how did this go? What were 3 good things that happened to me today that I should be grateful for? And what's 3 things that happened that I probably could have handled better?
Right.
I know I could find 3 in each one of those categories every day. So, but imagine if we thought about those 3 things we could have handled better every day, and then thought about 1 or 2 things to do differently. Would that help reduce our stress?
I would think that that's a great tool that we could start working on to put in our tool belt to deal with life's woes and frustrations.
So there's the awareness part that probably would be a good thing, and then there's the next step. How come I don't execute?
I don't know. That's something I'm going to really have to process, because I can't answer you off the top of my head about why not. When you know fully well it's something that would benefit you, it was something that would serve you very well, why not do it? And I don't know, I have to think on that.
So we can start, though, with those things that just keep coming up in our mind, those nagging things that come up in our mind over and over, that you are either wish you'd have said something to somebody, or still want to say something to somebody, or something's bothering you in the way that somebody's acting, or a certain situation you're thinking you need to change. When those things come up, what do we do?
Yeah, and just to develop a little action plan for ourselves.
Exactly.
Well, I know we've got a friend who is a big believer in the action of interruption, to interrupt a thought pattern. And whether it be doing something physical, standing up and stretching, whether it be some sort of a tactile experience where you have a rough surface that you rub your hands on, something like that, to interrupt a thought pattern. And I wish I could say that I implement that, but it oftentimes just escapes my mind. And so sometimes I move from category of stress to stress, and they're different pots. If I were to sit down and, how we were talking about the feelings wheel, I bet you I could come up with a stress wheel. You've got your beginning phase stress, like, oh, I forgot to buy the ingredient for dinner, right? I mean, nobody's going to really lose sleep over that, I hope. To the, oh, I really botched it on this presentation. I likely am not going to keep my job.
This could be career limiting.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's a huge range, right, of stress in your stress wheel. And so I think how you respond would vary depending on the severity. But if you have enough of those little stresses that you forget what to buy for dinner over and over and over again every day, where it becomes a burden and it becomes a source of friction in your family, that you have to develop some sort of a tool to deal with it, and then hopefully some memory triggers to help you respond before it turns into a stress.
No, that's a good point. And this is very individualized. I mean,
Absolutely.
I can hear part of my brain saying, "Oh, you're thinking too much on this. You're overanalyzing," or "Why would you want to rethink of a stress?" But maybe it is just handling the stresses that keep coming up, or that you feel here every time you think of it, or something that's just, we would just say, bothering me. I should at least sit down and think about that one. What is it about that situation that bothers me? Why am I stressed about it?
And does it keep repeating?
Again, that's the other thing too, is if this is a situation, so there's the acute stress versus the chronic stress. And sometimes the chronic stress is happening because you keep responding the same way and it's not working. You come in from work and your kid is sitting on the couch playing video games when they haven't done their schoolwork or their chores. Maybe this is something that's happening every night. And man, that can wear on you. That can be a big stressor. And okay, if it's happening every night, maybe need to have a different approach.
Right.
And how often do we sit down and think, you know what, maybe I should have a different approach? What could that approach be?
Yeah. Some things that happen repetitively are out of our control, and they develop a pattern of stress and anxiety. And before you know it, it really sets off some physical manifestations and some mental hiccups. And I can give you an example. My oldest daughter, when she was a baby, we could not get her to sleep through the night. We did the timed feeding thing where you wake them up every 3 hours. I felt like I did every trick that anybody put before me, and she would not sleep through the night. And I started developing just a lot of anxiety because I was so fatigued, so tired. And it's that, I'm going to say that word, triggering response when you start to hear a baby fidget or cry, and you instantly come out of sleep, and it does something to you psychologically, it does something to you physically. It's out of my control, but how I respond is within my control. And so it's rewiring, again, we've talked about this, rewiring those tracks that have been, become deep grooves in the brain, and having a different way to respond. And I'm sure we can all think of an example where there's a repetitive action that happens that's out of our control that is now stimulating a stress response, physically, emotionally, mentally, and we can't control them, but we can control us.
Absolutely. And figuring out that is part of the key of how we're not only useful to our fellows, but we're more useful and more at peace with ourselves. And I think that when I say that word peace, I realize that, if I come from a place of peace, and a place of being in the present and not worrying about the future, past, all that, then I'm in a better position to be useful to others and thinking about others more than myself, right? And so how do we get there, and how do we recognize that stress, and what do we do about that stress to get back to that place of peace, presence, centeredness? Those are woo-woo words that I think a lot of people think, whatever, I'm not a guru sitting on a mountaintop. That's not my goal. My goal is to get a certain number of things done by the end of the day that I can feel accomplished and be able to go to bed at night knowing that my family is safe and my work is done and I'm going to make a paycheck next week. And I get that, but I think that if that's your goal and you're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again every day, that's great if you're happy and at peace doing that. But if there's some things that are nagging you every day that you'd like to get out of, that's where you spend that incremental part of time of analyzing and seeing what could I do differently tomorrow.
Yeah. And I think for me, the curiosity, not judgment element in all of this is we oftentimes say things about ourselves in a declarative way, a judgment about ourselves. That's just how I am. That's just how I respond. That's just the way I like it. That's just things I hate. Fill in the blank with your statement, right? And it is a self-judgment. And instead of being curious about how can I change my response? How can I change my circumstance? How can I change, any manner of things so that I get a different outcome? That's really, the goal of any of these conversations through this platform.
I love the declarative, that word that you just said there, the declarative statement that I am this way, because that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Of course, you're going to respond that way if that's the way you think you are, even if that's not true. And how do we then break that cycle?
Right.
And how do we say, okay, maybe I'm not that way. Maybe my true self is somewhere else. And for whatever reason, I've gotten stuck in this rut. And I need to get out of it because it's not working for me.
Right.
Or for those around me.
Yep. For those of you that have dogs and have dealt with 4th of July fireworks or fireworks at any time or thunderstorms, and the dog absolutely flips out, you can't control the thunder. You can't control other people doing fireworks around you. But there are absolutely tools, right, that you can find to help calm your dog down. And I'm not trying to, equate anybody here to a dog, but I'm just saying there are measures that can be taken. You have this external force, this noise, this disturbance, this thing that causes a great deal of anxiety and uncertainty and insecurity. And what can you find that is a tool that will help you cope? Weighted blanket, a secure space to hide in. And, maybe that's literal. Maybe you literally need a weighted blanket to deal with some of the stress in your life, or, a part of your closet that you can go and hide in. But, you can think cleverly about those ways that you could potentially look to find some soothing tools or techniques that will help you when the inevitable thunder crashes.
So what I'm hearing is that if you know that there's going to be some stresses in your life, especially if you've got direct data that they keep occurring, that we should at least do some kind of prevention or some kind of a response and a recovery, knowing that that's going to happen again. A. B. Those stressors that happen in your life, those events that come up that are surprises or that you didn't anticipate or couldn't anticipate.
Sure.
Then what is the way you deal with those and how do you respond and recover from those?
Yeah. So I think, maybe there's a little bit of homework associated with today's episode. Maybe it is time to kind of write yourself out a stress wheel. And when I say you, I'm going to talk to myself first, right? To kind of analyze those pools of stress from the simplistic, I forgot to plan dinner tonight, to the stresses that you could anticipate potentially happening in the workplace or with health situations or family dynamics that are ongoing and systemic or could be deeply wounding, and to begin to look at that list of stresses, because they're not all created equal, right? And can you begin to then be curious about ways to mitigate your physical or emotional response to those varying degrees of stress?
And I love the way you talk about categorizing the stress, because they're not all the same. And I have seen surveys where it starts with, did you celebrate Christmas this year? And then did you celebrate with family? And then goes all the way up to, death of a child, death of a spouse. I mean, and there is a point system
Absolutely.
to stress. And I think if we were to kind of visualize and say, okay, I'm just not going to get above this level of stress, this many points. So, the dinner one, oh well,
Let it go.
But when I experience ones that are kind of over the threshold, or a bunch of stresses that put me over the threshold, whether quantity or quality of the stress, then I choose to do something different. I choose to go, take a bath or go meditate or go read a good book or do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
And that's very individual, to say, hey, I realize that I've had a certain amount of stress in my day, my week, my month. I need to deal with that. Otherwise, there's going to be consequences. And the thing is, take the time, because if we say, I'm too busy to be stressed, think about that statement.
Right.
I'm too busy to deal with my stress, even worse. So how do we, curiosity, not judgment, how do I ask the question of, where is my stress level right now, and what can I do about it?
So some homework for all of us. And then if you've got some pointers on how you deal with stress, maybe this is something that you've already thought about and you've got some techniques that you'd like to share, please do hit us up, comment, whether you're on Facebook, whether you're on YouTube, whatever channel you're watching us through, or of course you can always go to the website curiositynotjudgment.com, and there's an easy way to contact us through that platform as well. So always appreciate you listening or watching, and thank you so much.
Take care.
We'll see you next time.